So this is Sarah Rector, and she was of the Creek Indian ancestry. And right here it says Rector and her family were African American members of the Muskogee Creek Nation who live in a modest cabin in the predominantly black town of Taft, Oklahoma, which at the time was considered Indian territory. Now we know all of that makes no sense because, first of all, that term African American did not exist. It was Negro. And we know that the American Indians were reclassified as Negro. It says, following the Civil War, Rector's parents were formerly enslaved by Creek tribe members and were entitled to land allotments under the General Allotment Act of 1887. And we know that's propaganda because, as it was stated by Aboriginal Mac, that the land, it was given to Indians. And that's who had got the 160 acres worth of land. And it says, as a result, hundreds of black children, which we know they weren't black, we know that's slave status, or Creek freedmen, and we know freedmen, that was a catch-all phrase that they use not just for people of African descent, but they also used it for full-blooded Indians. And it says, were each granted 160 acres of land as Indian territory integrated with Oklahoma Territory to form the state of Oklahoma in 1907. It says, while lands granted to former slaves or workers were usually rocky and infertile, Rector's allotment from the Creek Indian Nation was located in the middle of a Glen Pool oil field and was initially valued at $556.50. Strapped for cash, Rector's father leased his daughter's parcel to a major oil company in February 1911 to help him pay $30 annual property tax. 2 years later, Rector's fortune took a major turn when the independent oil driller B.B. Jones produced a gusher on her land that brought in 2,500 barrels or 105,000 gallons per day. Okay, so we're going to leave that there. This is about John Conyers Jr. And as you know, when I did the video about Rosa Parks, I had mentioned John Conyers. And he was a U.S. representative. He was in Congress. He had worked with Rosa Parks. So, anyways, this is John James Conyers Jr. He was born May 16, 1929. He died last year on October 27, 2019, at the age of 90. It says he was of the Democratic Party. He served as a U.S. representative for Michigan from the years of 1965 through 2017. The districts he represented always included part of Western Detroit. During his final 3 terms, his district included many of Detroit's western suburbs as well as a large portion of the downriver area. And then I'm just going through. They said that he was born in Highland Park, but he died in Detroit, and his former spouse is Monica. He had got his education at Wayne State University. He was in the military. They said that he was in the Korean War. And it says Conyers served more than 50 years in Congress, becoming the 6th longest serving member of Congress in U.S. history. He was the longest serving, and it says African American, but we know he's not an African American. It says Conyers was the Dean of the House of Representatives. By the end of his last term, he was the last remaining member of Congress who had served since the presidency of Lyndon B. Johnson. He served in the Korean War. Conyers became active in the Civil Rights Movement. He also served as an aide to the Congressman John Dingell before winning the election to the House in 1964. He co-founded the Congressional Black Caucus in 1969, established reputation as one of the most liberal members of Congress. Conyers joined the Congressional Progressive Caucus when it was founded in 1991. Congress supported the creation of the single-payer healthcare system, the United States National Healthcare Act. He also sponsored a bill established Martin Luther King Jr. Day as a federal holiday. Conyers ran for mayor of Detroit in 1989 in 1993, but he was defeated in the primary both times. He served as a ranking Democratic member of the House Committee of the Judiciary from 1995 to 2007, and again from 2011 through 2017. Then it says he served as the chairman of the committee from 2000. Chairman of the House Oversight Committee from 1989 through 1995. In the wake of allegations he had sexually harassed female staff members and secretly used taxpayer money to settle a harassment claim, Conyers announced his resignation from Congress on December 5th, 2017. The fallacies that Mr. John Conyers Jr. had. Now, his bill was dealing with reparations, so we're going to get into this. Now, it says Jackson Lee's bill has the same number adopted by Conyers, H.R. 40, so it was House Resolution 40, that's a nod to 40 acres and a mule, the unfulfilled promise the Union leaders made to newly freed slaves in 1865. It says there's no holdup. You don't move legislation overnight. I would never say there's a holdup. Jackson Lee said the Judiciary Committee has been working on this, and we are very excited of the Speaker taking note of H.R. 40. The proposal would establish a committee charged with studying the institution of slavery in the U.S. from its inception until the end of Civil War in 1865 and recommend ways to compensate living descendants. Okay. Now, and it also says that they are a part of what it appears to be American descendants of slavery, which we know when you look into American descendants of slavery, they're actually talking about people who were kidnapped from Africa, brought to America to be slaves, so people of African descent, which does not include people of indigenous descent, which is where the problem is and where the problem lies, because we know that most of the people that's being called African Americans are really people of either of only American Indian descent or mixed American Indian and African descent. And we already know that even if an American Indian did have European or Asiatic ancestry or African ancestry, that most of their bloodline relatives would have been of the American Indian lineage. Okay, so that's something that we know. And then we also know that land, as far as acreage was given to Indians. Okay, so I'm going to show you that too. So there's a lot of issues with what John Conyers did. He was coming the wrong way as an African American, as a foreigner. Okay, so we know that's the major red flag right there. Okay, reparation is a noun. It's from the late 14th century. Reconciliation from Old French, reparation, and directly from late Latin, reparationem, nominative, repatrio, act of repairing, restoration, noun of action from past principle, stem from Latin reparare, restore, repair, meaning act of repairing or mending. And it says reparations, compensation for war damage owed by the aggressor. Okay, so it's something that is owed from an aggressor. Okay, so an act will be of like the Europeans, the different nations that came over here to take the land underneath the doctrine of discovery from our ancestors, from all the different Indian tribes. Okay, so that was an act of war that they did. So if they're going to give any sort of reparations, it won't be to an individual like how Adolf is trying to say, but it will be given to, the actual nations that was here during that time period that the French and the Dutch, the Germans, the British, the Spaniards had fought against. And so that's what it says on thelaw.com dictionary, and it says reparation And it says redress of an injury, amends for a tort inflicted, remedy. And it says here, redress, the act of receiving satisfaction for an injury sustained. Injury, any wrong or damage done to another either in his person, rights, reputation, or property. So, in other words, that an African American, a so-called African American, which is a person of African descent that was stolen from Africa, they would have to prove, where were they injured or where were their ancestor injured from. And we know that there was an injury to their ancestor's person because they were put in bondage and then they were forced to work, against their will. Or if they had a contract and there was a breach of contract, and that's also considered as an injury. But for American Indians, on the other hand, our injury would be that our ancestors were prisoners of war, and then as prisoners of war, they were forced into servitude and then had their land and natural resources taken. So that's what the injury will be for us as American Indians. Okay, so